Episode 57 CU February 3rd, 2025 Bird Flu Threat, and EPA tells probationary employees they could be fired. In Episode 57 CU1 Introduction to RAWSEP View 2A World Will Bird Flu Become Airborne 2B World, How a Nuclear Scientist Organization Responds to Climate Change 3A United States Washington, D.C. EPA tells more than 1,000 they could be fired immediately. A spokeswoman for Lee Zeldin, the new head of the agency, said the goal was to create an effective and efficient federal workforce. 3B United States California Los Angeles Home Values Plummet. 3C United States California Los Angeles House Cleaning. 4 Poland 5 Serbia Media. 6 China and U.S. Probable tariff effects. Main content. 1 Introduction. RAWSEP View. The United States government was on track in the Biden administration to reduce the prices for both clean energy heat pumps and clean energy electric cars. Trump tariffs are expected to upset those plans to prevent future air pollution and prevent climate change. The United States government should, instead of certifying wood stoves as safe when they are not safe, go forward with regulations that ban wood stove use and direct government money for use of forest. Refuse only for home building and furniture building. For just a few examples of use of forest products for non-burning uses, it is well known from scientific and medical research that wood burning is a substantial source of PM2.5 emissions, yet the wood burning industry uses the scientifically debunked theory named carbon neutrality of wood burning to argue that wood burning replacing coal burning in industry, and in a trickle-down argument that wood burning should continue for home heating should continue, presumably because it is called renewable. Wood may be renewable in the sense that a tree can be planted in the place of a cut-down burned tree, but it takes centuries or decades for the newly planted tree to attain the stature of the cut-down burned tree. During those centuries or decades, photosynthesis, which converts CO2 to oxygen and so sequesters some carbon, will not take place at the same rate as photosynthesis was performed previously, and wood burning emits both CO2 and PM2.5, and PM2.5 is not absorbed by trees, so PM2.5 is not diminished by planting a tree in the place of a cut-down and burned tree. In fact, a living tree closes its pores against the presence of PM2.5 from nearby wood burning, just as humans hold their breath in the presence of PM2.5 from nearby wood burning, and when a tree closes its pores, the level of photosynthesis that absorbs CO2 pollution goes down. Wood burning emits 90% PM2.5 particulate matter of 2.5 micrometer size, the perfect size to infiltrate the human lungs, setting off a cascade of human health problems and early deaths. Contrary to many beliefs, wood burning emits 2.8 times the PM2.5 as the fossil fuel coal burning, and wood burning emits 450 times the PM2.5 as the fossil fuel natural gas burning. Replacing coal burning with wood burning creates more air pollution in the form of CO2 and PM2.5 than coal burning. This emission data comes from testing the cleanest burning wood stove in the United Kingdom the EcoDesign wood stove, an international convention based on the scientifically debunked theory named carbon neutrality of wood burning. The emissions from wood burning are erased from all countries around the world when calculating if each country has met its climate goals. This non-counting or erasure of wood burning emissions data from climate goals does not mean wood burning emissions do not exist. Burning wood instead of coal increases the adverse health effects of PM2.5. Air pollution and hastens climate change. Stopping burning wood for residential home heating is an easy incremental way to be kind to your neighbor and to the planet. Choosing to burn wood when burning wood when it is more expensive than heating your home with a heat pump that is less expensive when you use the United States heat pump rebates available in 2025 in many states is like choosing a gas-powered car above an electric car. When both are of equal price, many of the Trump tariffs will result in less manufacture of clean electric vehicles in the United States and less price reduction to customers on existing electric vehicles. 2A World Bird Flu. Could the bird flu become airborne? Scientists were slow to recognize that COVID spreads through the air. Some are now trying to get ahead of the bird flu. Scientists recognize that COVID is airborne. They are now investigating how influenza may spread through the air as well. RAWSEP View. Could bird flu become airborne as the COVID-19 virus is airborne and as PM2.5 air pollution from indoor residential wood burning is airborne? Could bird flu eventually mutate and become widely transmissible to humans? Which departments of the United States government under the Trump administration would be able to continue to track the bird flu, and which departments of the United States under the Trump administration would be able to research ways to prevent transmission of the bird flu to humans, as was done when creating the COVID-19 vaccine? Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization. New York Times, February 3rd, 2025. In early February 2020, China locked down more than 50 million people hoping to hinder the spread of a new coronavirus. No one knew at the time exactly how it was spreading, but an expert on air quality in Australia did not like the clues she managed to find. It looked to her as if the coronavirus was spreading through the air ferried by wafting droplets exhaled by the infected. No one would listen. The doctor said it took more than 2 years for the World Health Organization to officially acknowledge that COVID spread through the air. Now 5 years after she started sounding the alarm, scientists are paying more attention to how other diseases may also spread through the air. At the top of their list is the bird flu. Last year, the Centers for Disease Control recorded 66 people in the United States who were infected by a strain of avian influenza called H5N1. Some of them most likely got sick by handling virus-laden birds. In March, the Department of Agriculture discovered cows that were also infected with H5N1, and that the animals could pass the virus to people possibly through droplets splashed from milking machinery. If the bird flu gains the ability to spread from person to person, it could produce the next pandemic. So some flu experts are anxiously tracking changes that could make the virus airborne, drifting in tiny droplets through hospitals, restaurants, and other shared spaces where its next victims could inhale it. Having that evidence is really important ahead of time, so that we do not wind up in the same situation when COVID emerged, where everyone was scrambling to figure out how the virus was transmitted. Said an infectious disease expert, scientists have been arguing over how influenza viruses spread for over a century. In 1918, a strain of influenza called H1N1 swept the world and killed over 50 million people. Some American cities treated it as an airborne disease, requiring masks in public and opening windows in schools, but many public health experts remained convinced that influenza was spread largely by direct contact, such as touching a contaminated doorknob or getting sneezed or coughed on during the 2024 flu season. A research team brought people sick with the flu to a hotel in Baltimore. The sick volunteers spent time in a room with healthy people people playing games. And talking together, the research team collected influenza viruses floating around the room, but none of the uninfected volunteers got sick, so the scientists could not compare how often influenza infects people through the air as opposed to in short-range coughs or on virus-smeared surfaces. It is hard to mimic real life. The bird flu is infecting more and more animals across the United States. Even cats are getting infected, possibly by drinking raw milk or eating raw pet food. Some influenza experts are concerned that H5N1 is gaining some of the mutations required to go airborne. A virus isolated from a dairy worker in Texas had a mutation that may speed up its replication in airways. For example, when another research team sprayed ferrets with airborne droplets carrying the Texas virus, 30% of the animals developed infections. Labs in the United States and all over the world are on the lookout to see if those viruses are getting closer to something that could be very dangerous. For humans, it would be impossible to predict when, or even if the bird flu viruses will gain the additional mutations necessary to spread swiftly from person to person, said a virologist. But with the virus running rampant on farms and so many people getting infected, the odds of airborne evolution are growing. We are letting nature do this experiment. To be world climate change, a new leader for the Canaries of global disaster. A woman is bringing more than a decade of experience in nuclear policy to the organization that sets the doomsday clock. Alexandra Bell, the new president and chief executive of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, said, "There are no quick fixes here." RAWSEP View, the editor of RAWSEP, often calls the near neighbors of indoor residential wood burners canaries in a coal mine who are predictors of what will affect the larger society if regulations are not put in place on indoor residential wood burning with the intent of shutting down all indoor residential wood burning one wood burner at a time if necessary. Here, the president of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists is called the canary in a coal mine because she warns that Trump withdrawal from the Paris Agreement is unwise. The BOAS president warns that the United States should instead move to a greener technologies to slow climate change. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization. New York Times, February 3rd. 2025. At the end of January, the keepers of the doomsday clock announced that the world was 89 seconds to midnight. The clock has inched closer to global destruction by way of human-made risks, including nuclear weapons and climate change. The iconic clock is set by the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, an organization founded by American physicists in 1945 after the United States detonated atomic bombs in Japan on Monday. The Bulletin named Alexandra Bell, a nuclear affairs expert, as its new president. Ms. Bell worked on arms control and non-proliferation issues in the U.S. State Department starting in the Obama administration, and she returned to the State Department as a deputy assistant secretary in 2021, promoting dialogue on nuclear issues with nations around the world. During the last 2 years of the Biden administration, she led the U.S. delegation of the P5 process, currently the only forum where the United States, China, and Russia discuss nuclear risk reduction. It's important to listen to the echoes of history, she said, to be informed by the past but not shackled to it. The following conversation has been edited for brevity and clarity and to address the actions or inaction of the Trump administration on climate change by the editor of RAWSEP. How does an 80-year-old organization like the Bulletin stay relevant in an ever-changing world? What are your thoughts so far on the direction of the new presidential administration? I was pleased to see President Trump's comments in Davos about reducing nuclear threats, but he is also withdrawing from the Paris Agreement. That is a step in the wrong direction. Hopefully the administration will see that there are economic and security benefits to the U.S. pursuing a move to greener technology. One hope there is an acknowledgement that climate change is not a matter of belief. This is happening. You can choose not to believe in it, but I guarantee that your insurance company believes in it. When that starts financially impacting people across the country, they will be looking to their leaders to do something about it. In what ways do you hope to shape the work of the Bulletin in the years ahead? I want people anywhere to understand why this is so important and why they have a part in it. How do we connect those people into the conversation about preventing this? It is our job to make sure they are a part of it, just as much as people in the Beltway are. My mother is from Finland, and we always talk about this Finnish ethos of sisu, unstoppable grit in the face of extreme adversity. We need more sisu in this field. We've inherited a mess, and we have to work together to clean it up. 3. A United States, Washington, D.C. EPA tells more than 1,000 they could be fired immediately. A spokeswoman for Lee Zeldin, the new head of the agency, said the goal was to create an effective and efficient federal workforce. RAWSEP View, out of all United States government employees, EPA probationary employees are the only ones so far who have received an email saying they could be fired immediately. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times, February 3rd. 2025. Union leaders called the move a clear attempt to gut an agency that President Trump dislikes. The Trump administration has warned more than 1,100 Environmental Protection Agency employees who work on climate change, reducing air pollution, enforcing environmental laws, and other programs that they could be fired at any time. An email was sent to staff members who were hired within the past year and have probationary status. Many of those employees were encouraged to join the EPA under the Biden administration to rebuild the agency. Others are experienced federal workers who had taken new assignments within the agency. Some had been hired to work funding clean energy projects aimed at reducing greenhouse gas emissions. At 9:21 a.m. on Monday, EPA employees received another email notifying them of that the agency-wide intranet was out of service. Without the internal agency network, employees cannot access documents or other information needed for their jobs. The email from EPA's Office of Mission Support reads, access to work epa.gov is current unavailable, and that technical specialists were working to resolve the issue. EPA workers appear to be the first to receive notice that they may be immediately dismissed. Through the EPA, the Biden administration developed aggressive regulations to curb planet warming pollution from power plants, automobiles, and oil and gas wells. EPA is at the center of the bullseye for President Trump's vindictive purge of public servants, said Michelle Roos, executive director of the Environmental Protection Network, a group of agency alumni. She called it the most chaotic and vindictive transition in the history of the Environmental Protection Agency. 2 EPA employees who received the email said it had caused them to rethink the Trump administration's offer to federal employees to resign but be paid through the end of September. The employees said they had initially dismissed that offer as untrustworthy. Probationary employees are considered easier to fire because they do not have the full range of civil service protections, but rules still exist, said Marie Owens Powell, president of the Federation of Government Employees Union, which represents about 8,000 EPA workers. There has to be cause, and the cause cannot be because you are a Democrat and it is a Republican administration. The union is consulting lawyers about whether the administration can fire workers based on a simple declaration of a change in agency priorities, staffing at the EPA peaked in 2004 during the George W. Bush administration, when there were 17,611 employees. Those levels took a sharp dip during the Obama administration amid Republican control of the House and Senate. When Trump entered the White House in 2017, the EPA had 15,408 employees. The following year, that number dropped to 14,172 as political appointees reversed regulations, shut scientists out of decision-making, and shrank the agency budget. 3. B. United States California guest essay that giant sucking sound? It's climate change devouring your home value. RAWSEP View experts predict that home values in risky areas will decline by 6% overall and insurance rates may increase by 29%. In those same 30 years, experts predict that in safe areas home values may increase by 10%. The experts predict this will lead to most homeowners gravitating and moving to safe areas and the rich continuing to live in desirable but risky areas because they can afford any losses incurred. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization. New York Times, February 3, 2025. Houses in the Altadena and Pacific Palisades neighborhoods were still ablaze when talk turned to the cost of the Los Angeles firestorms and who would pay for it. The total damage and economic loss could be $250 billion. In 2024, hurricanes Milton and Helene had already exacted tens of billions of dollars in American disaster losses. We are seeing home insurance prices spike around the country, pushing up the cost of owning a home. In some cases, insurance companies are pulling out of towns altogether, and in others, people are moving away. Soaring home prices in the United States may have peaked in the places most at risk, leaving the nation near a generational decline. The analysis predicts a reversal in housing fortunes for Americans, nearly $15 trillion in asset losses over the next 30 years, where home values may decline because of climate change. See map of change in home value due to insurance costs from 2025 to 2055 from 100% down in this chart of the cities of Las Vegas, Portland, San Antonio, Raleigh, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Memphis, Norfolk, Milwaukee, Buffalo, Minneapolis, Seattle, Phoenix, San Diego, St. Louis, Dallas, Boston, Tampa, Philadelphia, Detroit, San Francisco, Denver, Houston, Miami, Atlanta, Chicago, Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., and New York. Increasing insurance rates most likely will not drag down home prices much in the Northeast or Midwest. Large parts of the Southwest and West could suffer sharp declines in home values. Note the change in home values is modeled for changes in insurance premiums only and does not project future market forces. Climate change is upending the basic assumption that Americans can continue to build wealth and financial security by owning their own home. Residential real estate in the United States is worth nearly $50 trillion, nearly double the size of the entire gross domestic product. Almost two-thirds of American adults are homeowners in Pacific Palisades and Altadena. Home appreciation elevated many residents into the upper middle class across the country. Homes are the largest asset for most families, who hold approximately 67% of their savings in their primary residence. Average insurance premiums have risen 31% across the country since 2019 and are steeper in high-risk climate zones over the next 30 years. If insurance prices may on average leap another 29%, rates in Miami could quadruple. In Sacramento, California, they could double. How climate change may cause rising insurance rates over the next 30 years. Coastal Florida could have insurance rates more than triple as hurricanes intensify and sea levels rise. Northern Texas is likely to have both rising wildfire risk from drought and damage from hail and wind as storms intensify. In Washington and Oregon, wildfire risk will increase in drier forestland east of the Cascade Mountains. Not long ago, insurance premiums were a modest cost of owning a home, amounting to 8% of an average mortgage payment, but insurance costs today are about 20% the size of a typical payment, outpacing inflation and the rate of appreciation on the homes that makes owning property on paper anyway a bad investment. 30 years from now, the term of the classic American mortgage houses will be worth on average 6% less than they are today. Many people were coaxed into living in the very high-risk areas by the availability of insurance that was cheaper than it should have been for years. As climate-driven floods, hurricanes, and wildfires have piled up, so have economic losses. Insurance companies canceled policies, but in response, states redoubled support for homeowners, promising economic stability. But those discounts muffled the free market price signals, making Florida coastlines and California fire-prone hillsides seem safer today. Insurance underprices climate risk for 39 million properties across the continental United States, meaning that for 27% of properties in the country, premiums are too low. 55 million Americans will migrate in response to climate risks inside this country within the next 3 decades, and more than 5 million Americans will migrate this year. While property values are likely to drop in most places, they will rise by more than 10% by 2050. In the safer regions, homeowners will need to be wealthier, or renters will have to pay more. Relatively safe regions will emerge and discerning buyers will flock to them. Los Angeles is more resilient than Paradise, California. The New Jersey Shore or Florida Pacific Palisades will probably be rebuilt to its past splendor. Altadena, a middle-class neighborhood, is more likely to be snatched up by investors, gentrified and made unaffordable by both the cost of rebuilding and insurance. Altadena may prove to be the true predictor of a future in which no one but the rich owns their own homes, where insurance is a luxury good and where renters pay a monthly toll to large private equity landowners better suited to manage that risk. 3C United States, California, Los Angeles. What it will take to clean up properties after the LA fires. Many fire victims are eager to clear their home sites and move on to rebuilding. The big question is when. RAWSEP View, the EPA maintains that coming into contact with the ash is not safe for people except for workers trained in hazardous material removal. However, some homeowners seem to be cleaning up with do-it-yourself DIY methods, which may not be the safest way to clean up homes after an urban wildfire in the Los Angeles area. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization. New York Times, February 3, 2025. Before construction can begin, lots must be cleared of toxic materials and debris. Last week, crews donned protective suits and began clearing mountains of hazardous remains from the roughly 12,000 homes destroyed by one of the worst disasters in the history of the Los Angeles region. While the clearing process could take mere days on any given lot, it could be as long as 18 months before the very last property is ready for rebuilding. Next door to one site where EPA crews worked on Thursday, 2 women suited up in their own protective gear, a local environmental consultant and composting specialist, pulled compost onto the property. The consultant and the homeowner then mixed the compost into a bucket filled with water and Sprinkle the liquid over the debris of the home with a watering can. The solution could help degrade toxic materials in the ash. The consultant said the EPA maintains that coming into contact with the ash is not safe for people except for workers trained in hazardous material removal. I do not understand why not teaching residents how to help. Here is how to manage your own hazardous waste. The consultant said they're going to take a ton of time looking over every square inch. I could tell them exactly where my propane tanks and batteries and stuff are. It's so funny they let us buy all this stuff, but as soon as it burns they are like, stay away. Maybe we should build a less toxic world. For Poland guest essay. I am the foreign minister of Poland. Europe has got the message. RAWSEP View. The foreign minister of Poland believes economic disputes with the US are counterproductive. He believes that Trump is raising the bar from 2% to 5% in what he would like European Union countries to contribute to NATO expenses, but in 2024-23 European Union members of 32 spend at least 2%. Now the bar has been raised to 5%. Poland spends close to 5% of its GDP on defense, the highest proportion in NATO. RAWSEP key excerpt from the article below. Poland sent brigades to Afghanistan and Iraq and kept them there for almost 2 decades. Poland never sent a bill in 2025. Those who do not wish us well are many. The autocratic axis comprising Russia, Iran, North Korea, and China represents a grave threat to much of the world. To face such an alliance, America and Europe need each other more, not less. Our adversaries want nothing more than to see us fragmented, plagued by economic disputes, and unable to lead. Instead, let's continue on the path of partnership of peace through strength as friends and allies. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission. Particulates, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. New York Times. February 3, 2025. In the mid-1990s, we lived in a unipolar world in which the United States was the only unquestioned global power. 30 years later, those who turned to Washington looking for leadership might do so with less confidence. In 2017, Trump spoke to thousands of Poles gathered on the streets of Warsaw. Europe must demonstrate that it believes in its future by investing its money to secure that future, because the fundamental question of our time is whether the West has the will to survive. As some allies grow weary of American power, Americans seem to be growing weary of their allies. For years in his first term and in his recent campaign, President Donald Trump has been clear that he will put America first and has repeatedly reminded other members of NATO that the alliance is not a free ride. Europeans finally got the message. Our security is not a service provided by the United States. It begins with us. But European security independence does not have to be incompatible with close collaboration with the United States. In an ideal world, in a safer world, there will be both. In Europe, we are acutely aware where our priorities lie. Since the start of the Russian unprovoked war against Ukraine in February 2022, the European Union and its 27 member states have made more than $140 billion in financial, military, humanitarian, and refugee assistance available to Ukraine. European leaders have also agreed to commit up to $54 billion until 2027 to support Ukraine recovery, reconstruction, and modernization. In November 2024, the EU helped member states to make joint investments in weapons and ammunition. Poland assumed the presidency of the Council of the European Union on January 1, 2025, and put security at the top of its list as the war in Ukraine rages. Just a few hundred miles from EU borders, we aim to lead Europe toward greater resilience and closer transatlantic cooperation. Trump has consistently pushed NATO allies to spend at least 2% of their GDP on defense. Early in Trump's first term, only 5 countries met the threshold, Poland among them, but last year 23 members of 32 spent at least 2%. Now the bar has been raised. Trump said in January 2025 that NATO members, they should be at 5%, not 2%. 5% is an ambitious goal for even the United States, where the Department of Defense budget is about 3.5% of GDP. Poland has become one of the most important customers of the U.S. military industry, ordering tens of billions worth of equipment. Since 2022, we buy Patriot missile systems, Abrams tanks, Apache helicopters, and F-35 fighter jets produced in America. Europe and the Poland desire for closer military cooperation with the United States and its ambition to strengthen its own defense industry are not contradictory. The transatlantic alliance has never been a one-way street. The United States supported European defense for decades after World War II, but the only time NATO's Article 5 has ever been invoked was in response to September 11th, when allies came to America's aid. Serbian state media shift tune in coverage of huge protests testing leader. State TV had ignored the demonstrations against President Aleksandar Vučić, but now it is putting a spotlight on the rallies. RAWSEP View, the media coverage of Serbian protester rallies, which are supported by even Serbian government judges and prosecutors, shows a change in Serbian society toward examining corruption in the Serbian government. Key RAWSEP excerpt about the catalyst for the Serbian protests of government corruption. The weekend protests in Novi Sad, held 3 months after a structural failure at a newly renovated railway station in the city, killed 15 people, drew not only students from local universities and Belgrade, but also throngs of older people angry over what they see as a system riddled with corruption. The November 1st, 2024 collapse of a concrete canopy suspended over the station entrances crushed the people below it and triggered the snowballing protest movement, which was driven by a belief that official negligence and graft were responsible for the tragedy. The station was renovated by a consortium of state-owned Chinese companies, and work on the canopy was carried out by a private Serbian contractor that had been promoted by officials. Key RAWSEP excerpt about the current Serbian president. The Serbian president Aleksandar Vučić confident that his party can defeat fractious opposition parties in any new election given the uneven electoral playing field, has since vowed to go on the offensive against his political opponents and to call a general election if parliament fails to approve a new government to his liking. I will not give anyone this state on a platter, he told supporters on Saturday. I will fight. President Vučić shows no sign of giving up. Last week, he fired his prime minister Milos Vucevic, a loyal ally of former mayor of Novi Sad and chairman of the governing party, known as SNS, leaving the country without a government. RAWSEP key excerpt about the government-run media in Serbia. One observer said that the sudden shift in messaging by the state broadcaster RTS is just part of a game to show that there is a bit of fair media coverage, and even without state television and radio firmly on the president's side, Vučić still controls a battery of potent media weapons like the private television station Pink, which remains unswervingly loyal, and an array of vitriolic tabloids show no sign of wavering in their support for the president. Tabloids like Informer, a particularly vicious attack dog for the government, have savaged student activists as traitors serving neighboring Croatia, the main enemy of Serbia during the wars of the early 1990s over the ruins of Yugoslavia. The governing party denunciation of RTS journalists for their neutral coverage of events in Novi Sad as a preemptive move to keep them in line, and a message to the heavily rural base of the party that nothing has Really change they worry that the media might flip they worry about the military about the prosecutors. Everyone excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates of 501c3 nonprofit organization. New York Times February 2nd, 2025 when tens of thousands of protesters blocked 3 key bridges across the Danube River paralyzing second biggest city in Serbia. This weekend the beleaguered governing party of the Balkan country issued a stern warning not to the protesters but to the state-controlled broadcasting service for reporting on them after mostly ignoring 3 months of student-led street demonstrations across the country. Radio television Serbia, long a propaganda bullhorn for President Aleksandar Vučić, had suddenly shifted gears and put protests in Novi Sad atop its news bulletins worse still at least for the governing party it reported factually without denouncing the protesters as traitors in the pay of foreign intelligence services or puppets of the opposition as it has in the past. Control of the media has been a central pillar of the system of Serbia under Vučić, allowing him to weather multiple rounds of protests by demonizing and discrediting protesters and to keep a firm grip on power for more than 12 years. Many, however, are now asking whether this control is slipping and with it perhaps the president's increasingly authoritarian rule. Many judges and prosecutors, though all ultimately dependent on the state for their careers, now support the students at least privately. The Bar Association of Serbia voted on Sunday for lawyers to suspend work for a month in solidarity with students who have barricaded campuses across the country. The recent protests over several weekends represent the biggest outpouring of discontent since street demonstrations in the late 1990s against Slobodan Milosevic, nationalist leader of Serbia during the Balkan Wars that followed the collapse of communist Yugoslavia. 6 China. For China, Trump's moves bring pain, but also potential gains. President Trump's tariffs hurt China, but his other actions have alienated U.S. allies, giving Beijing an opening to strengthen its global standing. RAWSEP View. China is benefiting from turmoil created recently by the Trump government transition. Key RAWSEP excerpt from the article below. The Trump administration's move to freeze most foreign aid, which has disrupted aid programs around the world, has already benefited China in Southeast Asia. The halt in funding has raised questions about American reliability. China needs to do nothing and look like the good guy. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates of 501c3 nonprofit organization. February 3rd, 2025 as President Trump was locked in a war of words with the leader of Colombia. China's ambassador to Colombia declared that relations between Beijing and Bogota were at their best moment in decades. Beijing saw an opportunity to strengthen its hand in the high-stakes superpower rivalry between China and the United States. China is taking stock of the openings that Trump's moves are giving China. Trump has alienated U.S. allies and partners like Canada and Mexico by imposing steep tariffs on their exports. He has weakened America's global authority by cutting foreign aid and withdrawing from the World Health Organization and the Paris Agreement, a UN climate pact. China will use the opportunity to reshape the world in its favor. Beijing, which has accused Washington of using its dominance to contain China's rise, has tried to drive a wedge between the United States and its allies, including the European Union, Japan, and Australia. The Chinese are aware of the damage Trump has done and is doing to U.S. credibility and influence globally, in fact happening faster than Beijing expected. Trump's threats to take the Panama Canal and Greenland, as well as to annex Canada as America's 51st state, could normalize a world order in which might makes right. That is an approach that is familiar to Beijing. It sends a signal to China that when it comes to its own claims to the self-governing island of Taiwan and much of the South China Sea, coercion Trump's cooperation. Trump has presented himself as willing to negotiate and cut a TikTok deal with Xi Jinping. China's leader Trump has floated tying tariffs to TikTok. Trump has said TikTok should be half owned by an American company. Trump has said China should help end the Russian war in the Eastern European country. China, as the biggest provider of economic and material support to Russia, could conceivably pressure President Vladimir Putin to negotiate. China has avoided criticizing the Russian invasion of Ukraine. China takes the position that Russia has a right to protect its national security. Ukraine will not accept China as a peace broker because of the China pro-Russian position. Putin will not want to look subordinate to China. Trump has no real stomach to see China praised for playing a significant role. On Sunday, China vowed to respond to Trump's tariffs by filing a case with the World Trade Organization. China could engage in supply chain warfare, halting shipments to the United States of materials and equipment critical to U.S. industry. In December 2024, China stopped antimony and gallium export to the United States, which are needed to manufacture some semiconductors. China's trade surplus, the amount by which its exports exceeded imports, reached $1 trillion in 2024. China has also not said how it will respond to the elimination of duty-free handling for packages worth up to $800 per day for each. American factories all over China have shifted in recently to e-commerce shipments directly to American homes so as to bypass the many tariffs collected on clothing and other goods that are imported and sold through American stores.